Jacqueline, Susan, Ansel Lamb and Barbara Janet Mayo were two young women who were unalived in separate incidents in 1970. Both women were last seen hitchhiking along motorways in England, and both were SA'd before being strangled to unaliving. Both of the unalivings occurred 7 months apart and a considerable distance from each other. Investigators suspect both unalivings were committed by the same person. Links between the two unalivings are often erroneously reported to have been proven via DNA testing, and although detectives announced in 1990 that the women's unalivings were linked, a DNA profile was not isolated in either case until 1997, and only in the case of Mayo. Despite numerous public appeals for information and reconstructions, both unalivings remain unsolved. The perpetrator or perpetrators of the unalivings of Ansel Lamb and Mayo is sometimes referred to as the Monster of the Motorway or the Motorway Monster. Jacqueline Jackie Ansel Lamb was an 18-year-old secretary born on the 21st of September 1951 who worked in Manchester and who was described as on the weekend of the 7th and 8th of March 1970, she had spent time collecting belongings from her old house in London and had attended a party in Earl's Court where she met a young man. On Sunday the 8th of March 1970, she attempted to hitchhike back to Manchester from London. She had been given a lift by the man she had met at Earl's Court to one of the slip roads of the M1 motorway in London, where she intended to hitch a lift northwards. She then shared a lift with another man 50 miles up the M1 to Buckinghamshire. How she travelled further north from there was not known. She was reported missing on the 9th of March when she didn't turn up to Manchester. On the day she disappeared, she was wearing a blonde wig, false eyelashes, a dark blue coat and maroon shoes. She was carrying a Japan Airlines bag because the initials of the company were the same as hers. The last place she was positively seen was a transport cafe named the Opera Cafe at High Lee, just off Junction 20 of the M6 motorway near Warrington in Cheshire. Between 9 p.m. and 10 p.m, she was seen in the cafe in the company of a man. A number of witnesses cited her there, including a chef, Delia Brown, who said that the man came through the door, went up to Ansel Lamb and then came to order 2 coffees. Brown said that she saw the man sitting down with her talking. The man was described as smartly dressed in business-like clothing. The pair left together and she got in the man's car. It is believed that the car may have been a white Jaguar. A final unconfirmed sighting of Ansel Lamb was her thumbing up a lift on the A556 road 1 mile from where her body was found. Sadly, on the 14th of March, her partially clothed body was found by a 10-year-old boy and his father as they walked through the woodland in Mere Cheshire just off the M6 motorway near the cafe she was last seen. She had been SA'd and strangled. Her body had been posed. She had bruises and cuts on her neck and face which indicated she had fought with the attacker. Barbara Mayo was a 24-year-old schoolteacher who lived in Hammersmith, London. On the 12th of October 1970, she set off to hitchhike to Catterick, North Yorkshire, to pick up her boyfriend's car which had broken down there. When she didn't turn up 2 days after she left London, her boyfriend reported her missing. She was last seen wearing a navy blue coat, lilac jersey and gold and tan slacks. She was thought to have been carrying a red bag with her. 4 days later, a family walking out in an isolated wood just off the M1 motorway at Alt Hocknell, near Chesterfield, Derbyshire, discovered her partially clothed body under a pile of leaves. She had been battered around the head and strangled to death with a length of flax. She was found next to a lover's lane named Hodmire Lane. Despite a detailed search, her bag containing her purse was not recovered and was never found. The media dubbed the killer of Mayo the Monster of the Motorway or the Motorway Monster. The murder became infamous and was later described by investigating officers as being a massive police hunt was launched by Cheshire Police after Ansel Lamb's murder involving 120 officers. Investigators soon determined that neither the man that Ansel Lamb had met in Earl's Court nor any of her other male associates could have been responsible for the murder. As many of the fans of Man City were known to have travelled along the M6 from London to Manchester on the weekend of her murder, investigators theorised the killer might have been one of these individuals. The brutal killing of Mayo led to what was described as Britain's The investigation into her murder was led by Detective Chief Superintendent Chris Pollard from Scotland Yard, as Derbyshire and Nottinghamshire police had limited resources. 1,500 police officers quizzed more than 125,000 people on motorways and took nearly 50,000 statements. In an unprecedented move, police set up checkpoints across 150 miles of the M1 between London and Leeds to ask drivers if they had any information, although this was not done until 2 weeks after the murder. For a whole day, every vehicle at every junction along the 150-mile length of the motorway was stopped and checked. Officers then launched a publicity campaign with posters pasted all over Britain. It is believed that some men who might have given lifts to female hitchhikers at the time had not come forward because they didn't want their wives to know, and police appealed to them saying that their wives would not be told if they came forward with information. A reconstruction was broadcast on television a week after the motorway checkpoints were set up, covering Mayo's last known movements from her home in Hammersmith to the M1 motorway. The reconstruction led to 700 members of the public coming forward to say they'd sighted her. A significant sighting came from a man that said he was certain he had seen Mayo or a girl fitting her description at 4 p.m. on the 12th of October, thumbing a lift and then getting into a white Morris Traveller at Kimberley, Nottinghamshire. This was less than 20 miles from where she was found dead and was located just off junction 26 of the M1 motorway. The witness said that he had driven past her thumbing for a lift, not being able to pick her up as he had others in the car. He said that he saw in his rearview mirror her being picked up by a Morris Traveller which he had seen parked nearby moments earlier. The driver was described as being between 30 and 35 years old, of medium build with mousy hair brushed forward. The witness said the vehicle followed behind him, heading towards the M1, and after both cars joined the motorway, he soon lost sight of the vehicle. Police believed the driver was her killer. At that time, 100,000 Morris Travellers were on the road in Britain, and each owner had to be traced and eliminated. Each driver of Morris Travellers in the country was spoken to. Despite this, the driver of the Morris Traveller never came forward. Despite notable witnesses who came forward after the reconstruction was a butcher from Kimberley who said that he thought she had come into a shop and then walked down the hill towards the main road. No one came forward to say that they had given Mayo a lift that day, which was unusual as someone had to have driven her out of London to Kimberley. Several courting couples were known to have been in the area where Mayo was found at the time she was dumped there, but none of them came forward either. The records of 28,000 criminals were checked and 76,000 leads were looked into. Mayo was known to have caught the tube from Hammersmith to Hendon and then thumbed a lift on the M1. It is believed that 250,000 motorists were using the northbound carriageway of the M1 between the time Mayo left London and the 14th of October. At that time, Mayo's murder inquiry was one of the biggest investigations ever mounted by one police force in Britain. Media reports soon suggested a link between the murders of Ansel Lamb and Mayo, noting their clear similarities. Investigators confirmed that they were looking into links. During the investigations, a man claiming to be the killer sent a note to detectives saying that the Mayo murder would not be the last. When Yorkshire Ripper Peter Sutcliffe began his murder spree in the 1970s, Derbyshire Constabulary investigated whether the killings could be linked to Mayo's murder. Upon being convicted of the Ripper murders in 1981, he was formally questioned in connection with her death. It was known that he had owned a Morris Traveller and had travelled to and from London around October 1970. Sutcliffe was finally eliminated from the investigation in December 1997. By 1990, Cheshire Police and Derbyshire Police increasingly suspected that the murders of Ansel Lamb and Mayo could be linked. In January 1991, the lead investigators on each murder case from two forces appeared on a joint appeal on Crime Watch, saying that although they were by no means certain they were looking for one man, there were striking similarities between the cases. It was announced that Cheshire and Derbyshire Police had decided to combine forces in an attempt to solve the two cases. A number of women came forward after the appeals to say that they'd been SA'd in the same area where Mayo had last been seen shortly before or after her murder. The lead investigator on the Ansel Lamb murder case revealed on Crime Watch that forensic scientists had recovered several pieces of carpet fibre believed to have come from a carpet roll or carpet sample. On the weekend she was murdered, there had been a carpet exhibition at Earl's Court in London. It was also noted that the man she was last seen with was described as a rep or a salesman, and that it was the investigators' belief that the murderer had some connections to the carpet industry. In 1997, Derbyshire Police obtained a DNA profile of the killer of Mayo from her clothing. Police attempted to trace all of the 2050 original suspects for DNA testing in order to see if their profiles matched. By 2009, all but a handful had been located and eliminated. It was this DNA testing that also allowed detectives to eliminate Peter Sutcliffe from the investigation. 200,000 DNA profiles then on the National DNA Database were quickly eliminated from the inquiry, and 9,000 samples taken from serving prisoners were also examined, but none matched the killer's profile. Police were hopeful that the recent DNA developments would soon help solve Mayo's murder. Detectives were also hopeful of DNA advances assisting in the Ansel Lamb inquiry and in determining whether the two women had been killed by the same man. A Derbyshire police spokesman stated, However, in 1997, Cheshire Police revealed that they had not at that point been able to isolate a DNA profile from Ansel Lamb's garments. In August 2001, detectives from Derbyshire Police made a televised appeal for information on a 90-minute programme titled Britain's 10 Most Wanted Murderers. Multiple sources state that Ansel Lamb and Mayo's murder were conclusively linked through DNA in 1990. However, this is inaccurate, as although detectives concluded in 1990 that the two murders were likely, although not certainly linked, no DNA profiles were isolated in the murder investigation until 1997, when the DNA profile was isolated from Mayo's clothing. Cheshire Police revealed at the time that they had not, at that point, managed to discover any DNA on Ansel Lamb's clothing. In 2020, a former boyfriend of Mayo revealed that, despite the reports, investigators never examined a DNA profile in the Ansel Lamb case. He said that the claims that had originally came from a Reuters report that erroneously assumed that a DNA match had been made when police announced in 1990 that they believed the murders were likely linked. However, he added that while in the 1990 reinvestigation did not prove a DNA link between the two women's murders, it did establish that other forensic evidence linked the murders. In the late 2000s, police investigated whether serial unaliver Pete Tobin could have committed the unalivings, as he had just been convicted of the unalivings of 3 young women, including that of a hitchhiking girl he had picked up and unalived in 1991. However, police eliminated him from their inquiries. Criminologist David Wilson stated in a book on Tobin in 2010 that he was unlikely to be responsible and could be ruled out as a suspect by DNA, but that the DNA samples from the 2 unalivings had already been cross-referenced to Tobin's profile. In 2008, a reclusive man who had just passed away was found to have newspaper clippings regarding Ansel Lamb's unaliving hidden in his house alongside a confession of the unaliving of another woman, 19-year-old Lorraine Jacob, who had been unalived in Liverpool in September 1970. The man had previously lived in London, Manchester, Bolton and Wigan before he passed away of cancer. Investigators said that there was no evidence linking him to Ansel Lamb or Mayo's unaliving. They pointed out that the man had no access to a car and had never had a driving licence. In 2011, crime writer Scott Lomax revealed in a book he published about unsolved unalivings that Manchester City were playing in London at the time of Mayo's unaliving, just as in the case of Ansel Lamb's case, and the police never investigated whether the unaliver could have been returning from the football match in London when he came across Mayo on the M1. In 2015, crime writers Chris Clark and Tim Tate published a book in which they claimed that Ansel Lamb and Mayo's unalivings could be linked to Yorkshire Ripper Peter Sutcliffe. However, he had previously been ruled out by investigators in 1997 through DNA. Clark and Tate also claimed in the book that Sutcliffe could also be responsible for the unalivings of Eve Stratford and Lynn Weeder. But the DNA sample in Mayo's unaliver case has not been linked by police to the cases of Weedon or Stratford, showing that unalivings were committed by different people. Upon Sutcliffe's passing in 2020, Clark submitted a Freedom of Information request to the Home Office, asking if Sutcliffe's DNA was on the National DNA Database. The Home Office confirmed that it was, indicating that Sutcliffe can be ruled out of unsolved unaliving cases in which there are existing DNA evidence, such as the Mayo case. Notably, neither the Mayo or Ansel Lamb case was featured in the subsequent 2022 ITV documentary version of Clark's book. In 2019, Don Hill, the journalist behind a campaign to free a man he believed to be wrongly imprisoned for the 1973 unaliving of Wendy Sewell, claimed in a book that Sewell's unaliving could be linked to Mayo's. He claimed that Mayo and Sewell looked similar and that their unalivings had been committed nearby. However, other writers have said that there is little evidence to suggest that unalivings were linked. The man whose release Hale successfully campaigned for in the Sewell case, Stephen Downing, remains the police's only suspect in the unaliving of Wendy Sewell. In 2003, Derbyshire Police stated that, after a reinvestigation of the unaliving, that had the rules on double jeopardy have been difficult, they would have recharged Downing. Both Hale and Clark continue to regularly make claims in the media that either Sutcliffe or the unaliver of Wendy Sewell was responsible for the Ansel Lamb unalivings, or that they are the same. Investigators continue to regularly appeal for information on the unalivings of Ansel Lamb and Mayo. The building where Ansel Lamb was last seen is now Lim Truck Stop.